They called it progress. But to an old relic like me, a man who has breathed the dust of the Oregon Trail for 30 years, it smelled like an ending. My name is Silas. These hands are calloused from the leather reins, and these ears are more attuned to the wind howling through the red canyons of Nevada than to the voice of any man I was a stagecoach driver for Wells Fargo. For years, I was the king of the trail. I carried letters, I carried gold-drunk dreamers, and I carried fragile hopes across this god-forsaken wilderness. But then, the whispers started coming down the telegraph wires in '63. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap in the station house spoke of a beast, an iron horse, they called it. Two great companies, the Union Pacific from the east and the Central Pacific from the west, were racing to drive a spike into the very heart of this continent. They signed the Pacific Railroad Act while the cannons of the Civil War were still thundering back east. Abraham Lincoln wanted to bind this bleeding nation together with iron bands. I remember the first time I saw the survey stakes driven into the ground near Sacramento. They looked like grave markers. I stroked the mane of my led mare, Betsy. She snorted, shifting her weight as if she too could smell the acrid scent of burning coal on the wind. Our time is fading. Betsy, I told her. The age of leather is yielding to the age of steam. I took a contract hauling supplies for the Central Pacific out of California. The men in charge, Leland Stanford and his partners, were rich, soft men. But the problem they faced was as hard as the Devil's Skull, the Sierra Nevada mountains, a wall of solid granite rising 7,000 feet into the sky. That is where I saw them, the army that would conquer the stone. They weren't the burly white men I was used to seeing in the saloons. They were slight men arriving by the sheepload with long braided queues down their backs and wide straw hats shading their eyes. The foreman called them Celestials. The history books called them the Chinese. Lord have mercy, the white workers quit in droves. They said I didn't sign up to dig into hell. But the Chinese, they stayed. I remember parking my rig at the base of Cape Horn in '65. It was a sheer cliff, dropping 2,000 feet straight down to the American River. There was no foothold, not even for a mountain goat. But the track had to go there. I watched in disbelief as the Chinese workers were lowered in fragile woven reed baskets, dangling like spiders on a silk thread above the abyss. The wind whipped at their faces. They would hand drill holes into the sheer cliff face, clink, 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 pack them with black powder, light the fuses, and then frantically signal to be hauled up before the mountain exploded. I saw a rope snap once. It was a Tuesday. There was no scream, just a terrible silence as that small figure plummeted. He vanished into the river mist below. The men remaining on the cliff face didn't stop. They bowed their heads for a heartbeat, offered a silent prayer to ancestors far across the ocean, and continued to strike. Black powder was slow. Too slow for the bosses. They wanted speed. So they brought in a chemist from England, a man with eyes that twitched. He brought a new devil called nitroglycerin. Liquid fire, the boys called it. It looked like syrup, innocent and clear. But if you looked at it wrong, it would blow you to kingdom come. I was there at the tunnel heading when a crate of the devil's breed was mishandled. I didn't see the explosion. I felt it. It picked up my wagon and threw it 3 feet sideways. When the dust cleared, there was nothing left of the foreman and 3 workers. Not a boot, not a bottom, just a hole in the rock and the smell of ozone and blood. After that, the Chinese refused to carry it. Can you blame them? So they poured the nitro right there on the spot, mixing it inside the camps. It was a dance with death every single day. But the tunnels, they moved. Foot by foot, inch by inch, they chewed through the granite. If you think hell is fire, you're mistaken. I have seen hell, and it was white. The winter of 1866 to 1867, the heavens opened up over the high Sierras. The snow did not fall, it was dumped. Drifts of 40 feet swallowed the tallest pines whole. My horses were buried up to their necks. We had to dig them out every morning just to keep them from freezing. But the rails had to run. The tracks were covered, so the workers went underground. They dug the city beneath the snow. Tunnels connected their sleeping quarters to the work face. They lived like moles in a subterranean world of perpetual ice, never seeing the sun for months. They breathed smoke and stale air, their lungs turning black. That was when the avalanches started. We called it the White Death. It doesn't rumble like thunder. It starts with a sharp crack like a rifle shot. One night I was drinking coffee by a weak fire when I heard it. A slide swept away an entire camp of Chinese workers. 20 men. Gone. Just like that. We tried to dig, but the snow was packed as hard as concrete. We didn't find them until spring. When the snow melted, there they were, still standing, tools in hand, frozen upright in the moment of their death. A ghostly army waiting for a train that would never come for them. While I was shivering in the Sierras, a different kind of war was raging in the east. I rode out to the Nebraska territory in '67 to deliver a payroll shipment to the other side, the Union Pacific. If the Central Pacific fought the mountain, the Union Pacific fought the open plains. And the people who lived on them, the workforce here was different. They were Irishmen, free slaves, and veterans from the Civil War. Men who knew how to shoot and didn't mind a fight, and a fight is what they got. You see, the Iron Horse was cutting straight through the hunting grounds of the Cheyenne, the Sioux, and the Arapaho. The buffalo were disappearing, the tribes were angry, and they had every right to be. I was riding near Plum Creek when I saw the smoke. A raiding party had derailed a work train. They pried up the rails and piled ties on the track. The engineer didn't stand a chance. The locomotive tipped over like a wounded buffalo, hissing steam and spewing fire. I watched from a ridge as the warriors rode circles around the wreck. It wasn't just savagery, it was desperation. They were fighting for their world, just as I was mourning mine. General Dodge and his soldiers rode in, guns blazing. The plains turned red. I realized then that every railroad tie on this flat line was baptized in blood. Either from a worker or a warrior, the Union Pacific moved fast, and trailing behind the track layers was a traveling circus of sin known as Hell on Wheels. Imagine a town that moves every few weeks. Tents, shacks, and portable gambling tables. Wherever the rail has stopped, the town sprang up. Julesburg, Cheyenne, Laramie. I spent a night in one of those towns. It was louder than a battlefield. The piano music clashed with the sound of gunshots. Whiskey flowed cheaper than water. There were gamblers, swindlers, and soiled doves. Women with tired eyes and painted faces. They had a saying in Hell on Wheels. A man for breakfast. It meant someone was murdered every single night. I saw a man shot over a card game of Pharaoh. The bullet went through him and shattered a whiskey bottle behind the bar. The bartender didn't even stop pouring. He just stepped over the body and asked, "Who's next?" It was the wildest, ugliest, most alive place on God's earth. And it was all fueled by the railroad money. By April 1869, the end was in sight. The two lines were closing in on Utah. But there was one last piece of pride to settle. The Central Pacific bosses made a bet. They claimed their men could lay 10 miles of track in a single day. 10 miles. It was unheard of. 2 miles was a good day. I rode out to witness it on April 28th. It was like watching a military drill. 8 Irishmen lifted the rails. They had names like Michael Shea and Pat Joyce. They moved like a machine. Grab, lift, step, drop. Down the foreman would shout, clang. The rail hit the ties. Then came the spikers. Clink, clink, clink. Then the bolters. They didn't stop for food. They ate sandwiches with one hand and swung hammers with the other. The Chinese crews followed behind, tamping the ballast, leveling the earth. It was a symphony of sweat and iron. By sunset, they had done it. 10 miles and 56 feet of track laid in 12 hours. Those 8 men had lifted over 2 million pounds of iron that day. Their backs were broken, their hands were raw meat, but they stood tall. They were gods of the rails that day. Time slipped away like sand through an hourglass. Finally, the fateful day arrived. May 10th, 1869. Promontory Summit, Utah Territory. It was a clear day, with the desert wind kicking up the dust. I drove my old rig to the edge of the gathering, standing well back from the noisy crowd. There, the two iron beasts faced each other. The Jupiter from the west and the number 119 from the east. They blew smoke, growling like two bulls ready to charge. Men in fine suits stepped forward. Governor Stanford, Dr. Durant. They held silver hammers and spikes made of gold. They drank champagne and gave flowery speeches about the glory of America. But I did not look at them. I looked at the edges of the photograph. I looked for the Chinese workers in their blue tunics. I looked for the Irish men with their battered hats. I looked for the ghosts of the men buried under the Sierra snow and the Nebraska sod. They were the ones who built this. But they weren't allowed in the center of the picture. They leaned on their shovels, tired eyes watching the wealthy men drive the final spike into the work that they had bled to build. When the final hammer blow fell, hitting the telegraph wire, it sent a signal out to the waiting world. Just one word. Done. A cheer went up that shook the earth. The train whistle screamed, a long, piercing shriek that tore through the ancient silence of the desert. In that moment, I felt a heavy stone in my chest. The world had just gotten smaller. There would be no more months-long journeys, no more mysteries on the horizon. The Wild West was officially tamed. The crowd dispersed as the sun began to dip low. The trains rolled away, carrying the noise and the dignitaries back to the cities. It was just me, my old mare Betsy, and the vast silence of Utah. I had unhitched Betsy. Her skin was sagging now, much like my own. "It is over, old girl," I whispered, patting her neck. "We have done our part. The mail will go by steam now." I sat by a small fire, watching the rails glint under the cold moonlight. Tomorrow, a letter will fly from New York to San Francisco in 7 days. It used to take me months. People will glide over mountains that took me a lifetime to cross, sitting on velvet seats drinking wine. They will look out the window and see a blur of scenery. They will never know the taste of the alkali dust, the smell of the sagebrush after rain, or the bone-deep chill of a lonely night watch. They call it progress. And perhaps they are right. The nation is united. The wound is stitched closed with iron thread. But tonight, let an old driver mourn for a lost world. A world that was vast, dangerous but free. A world where a man was measured by the grit in his soul, not the coal in his furnace. I laid my head back on the hard earth. Where would I go tomorrow? Maybe north to the Dakotas. I hear the iron rails haven't reached there yet. I laid my head back on the hard earth. Where would I go tomorrow? Maybe north to the Dakotas. I hear the iron rails haven't reached there yet. But tonight, I'll still have the stars. And as long as the stars still shine, this old cowboy still has a trail to ride.